The first thing I did that is not shown in this video is I screen printed the Goofy logo in the center of this board, and what you're seeing right now is the taped over version. I took the blue painter's tape and I layered it on top of the screen print. This is what you'll do with your art. You'll put the painter's tape over on top. You'll probably have to rip off a lot of little small pieces to get the edges right. You want to make sure it's perfect, and then after that you'll want to tape the outside of the board as well as the bolts. So you don't want the paint to spill over the side, and you don't want it to seep through the bolts holes. Once you've got your board taped up right, the next steps are to select the paint you're going to be using. You're going to want to use acrylic paint because it's a bit more watery and moves around. I like to use a lot of colors, so when I'm making a drip design, I'll pick out 5 to 6 different colors that I think will go well together, and then splatter them across the board in puddles. And there's no really formula for it, just make sure that the paint's close enough so that when you start moving the board around, it'll drip into each other and combine to make that cool swirly drip pattern. The further spread out the drops you have, the less they'll combine. You don't even need to use multiple colors, you could use 2 colors, but just make sure that when you're dripping it onto the board, you have them close enough that they'll swirl in. Otherwise, it'll just be one color dripping across the board and it won't look like much. So here you see I have all the paint spread out across the board in the puddles, a lot of different colors. Looks super random at the moment, but you'll want to make sure that you spread them out accordingly so when they swirl, they'll combine in a cool way. You don't want too much of one color in one area because then it'll just turn into a color block, like I said earlier. And next step is to then just swirl the board around a bunch of times, smack it on the ground, get the paint moving, combining. Just use your eyes to see how well it's combining, where you need to switch the board around, flip it upside down. It's all up to you, and the magic will soon set in. The quicker you start swirling the paint around, the better it'll move. It will start drying fairly quick if you're in a hotter room. I'm doing this in a garage, so it was actually cold and I didn't really have to worry about that. But the quicker you get to the swirl, the better it'll come out. As you start swirling the paint around, you may notice there's certain areas of the board that aren't getting hit very much, so don't be afraid to add more paint where necessary. I'm liking what I'm seeing here, so the board's all done with the swirl. Check it out, and now it's time to let it dry. When it comes to drying the board, a couple of things to keep in mind is that the hotter the room it's in, the better it'll dry, the faster the process will be. Using a heat lamp significantly speeds up the drying process, something I highly recommend if you have. If you don't worry about going out and buying one, it'll just take longer to dry. I left the board in the garage for a little while where it's cold and it really wasn't drying good even with the heat lamp, so I moved it inside and it sped up the process for sure. The process takes about 2 to 3 days total in terms of drying time. Once you get the drip done, it takes about a day to dry, even with a heat lamp. You want to make sure it's fully dry before you start the next steps. So take your time, you can feel it out with your hands once you think it's dry. If it's still a little bit wet, just give it a little bit more time. Alright, so the next step of the process is to peel off that painter's tape that we applied to the deck. This will allow your graphic to come through and not be covered by the drip paint any longer. If you're lucky, you'll be able to peel off the tape in one nice big piece. Sometimes it does break off into smaller pieces and it's a bit more tedious. My camera stopped recording when I was peeling off the first couple pieces of tape, so I'm only able to show you this last bit here, but it should give you an idea of what to do. If you're not able to see your tape, definitely keep in mind where you put the tape down and use a razor to cut in through the paint and then get under the tape to start the initial peeling. Once you get your tape peeled off and your design is coming through, you'll want to touch it up with either paint or paint pens. I usually prefer paint pens so I can be more accurate with the design. What you see here in my logo is that there's a lot of white space showing. My screen print got a little messed up when I originally did it, but I wasn't worried at all because I knew I could just touch it up later. Now you'll see me going over with a black paint pen to fill in those white spots and get the full design looking good. I also touch up a couple of the edges around the eyes and mouth where there's white showing through. Just use a similar color paint pen or the acrylic paint that you originally used to touch up those spots and get it looking clean. I'll let the paint from the paint pen dry. Doesn't take too long. Give it probably like 20 minutes to an hour. Then when you come back to it, you're ready to apply the clear coat of paint. It's now time to apply the clear coat to the top layer. This will add a nice shine and give it a smooth texture overall. As you can see here, this is the bottle I'm using. I picked it up from Hobby Lobby. It's like $7. It's not totally necessary to the process, but it's something I absolutely would do every time because I like the way it gives a shine and adds a nice clear consistent layer to the top. It will bring your board from looking like a matte sort of paint color to a nice shiny gloss. I don't usually skate a painted skateboard. I prefer to hang them up as wall art, but if you are planning on skating one, I would highly recommend using the clear coat so it's able to slide better, but the board surely will be a lot heavier from the acrylic paint you're adding, so keep that in mind. Once the clear coat's on, you're going to want to put it back under the heat lamp or just let it dry again. This process will take probably another 24 hours. Just to be safe, you You may need to add a second layer of clear coat. That's up to you based on how it's looking. I didn't have to for this board. It was looking good off the first run. Alright, so the board's all finished now. Last step is to take off the painter's tape that's around the edges and on the bolts holes, and then it's good to go. Now I'm going to show you some close-ups of the board and the final product. I really like how this one turned out, and I'm super happy with it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Peace.